Welcome everyone. Please give us a few moments to make sure that all families have been able to log in. While you're waiting, we have shared some housekeeping items up here on the screen. Hi folks, welcome everyone. Please give us a few more moments to make sure that all families have been able to log in. While you are waiting, we have shared some housekeeping items here on the screen. Hi everybody, my name is Reggie Gacad and I want to welcome you to the third webinar in our Spring 2021 Family Webinar Series. I am the Assistant Director in the First Year Center, and tonight I'm joined by my colleague, Will Andrews, Associate Director of Residential Life. We are so excited that you've chosen to join us for tonight's conversation. Some information before we get started. First, we want to clarify that tonight's webinar is for families with students in the classes of 2024, 2023, and 2022. Incoming first-year students, the class of 2025, will be contacted later this spring about their housing selection process. Second, we want to make sure that you know how to submit questions during this webinar. You'll notice that we have given you the ability to ask questions via the Q&A feature. Two of our professional staff within the First Year Center are helping to field these questions. We will answer those we find applicable to the audience as a whole on this webinar, and we'll respond to more nuanced or personal questions via email next week. Let's go ahead and make sure you know how to use the Q&A feature. Go ahead and look at the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen to share the place where you're watching from, and we'll name a few of these places live on air. While you're doing that, we will be showing a PowerPoint created by Residential Life during tonight's webinar. However, if you prefer to download this PowerPoint and follow along on your own, please follow the link that is about to be shared in the chat. As a note, in the chat feature, we will be sharing links and email addresses throughout the duration of the webinar. Fourth, this webinar is being recorded live. Later this week, we will upload this webinar to the families.woostel.edu website. Lastly, in a moment, we will hear from Will about the housing selection process for continuing students. If something he says sparks a question, don't forget to send us your question via the Q&A feature. After hearing from Will, we'll move on to our question and answer portion of the evening. Before passing things along, I want to make sure that we're able to share some of the places people are joining us from. We have families tuning in from Clarendon Hills, Illinois, Franklin, Massachusetts, Piedmont, California, among many other places. Now, since I know you all want to hear more about the housing selection process, I will turn it over to Will.
Thank you, Reggie. All right, so our housing selection process for the 2021-22 academic year. Next slide. So at this time, the housing selection at WashU is currently for students participating in the process to select their housing for the upcoming academic year. Our housing process for continuing students have three processes. One step is to apply. The second, and it's optional, is to group. And then third is to select, which is also optional, which I'll explain more of those in our next process. So students are to submit an application if they're interested in living in residential life, managed housing. They should apply by our deadline, which is March the 1st, to submit an application, and then also March the 1st to submit an application for living learning communities. Now, every student needs to fill out the March 1st application, and if you want to participate in a living learning community, there's a separate application for that process, and students also need to complete that by March the 1st. To help students find roommates, we want students to form groups with their peers of who they know and want to live with. We are creating virtual opportunities for students to connect and find others to form with their groups. We are encouraging students to participate in many of these virtual activities that we're going to have, and they're all going to be available come March the 1st. We recently hosted a info session for students, and it's also recently was posted on our social media and also on our website. But there are going to be great opportunities for students to meet students, find potential roommates. We just really encourage you to encourage your student to be on the lookout for when that information is posted so that they can participate in all the activities. In choosing a room in our select process, once the selection period opens, students are assigned a time slot with a date, and they'll pick their fall room. And basically, as you're logging into there's students logging into our WashU housing portal, and at that time, they'll be able to select. All of our time slots are random, and students form groups, and they'll assign a group leader. It's that group leader's responsibility to ensure that they log in at the provided date and time to be able to select their room. This year, students will not receive any priority in living in any particular residential college. That was a process we had prior, but due to COVID, we've kind of had to adjust our traditional method of how we've typically run this process. But all students will have an equal opportunity and will participate in only one round of room selection if they form a group and go through our process. Our living learning communities this year, we're excited to bring those back and start them up. Again, all of this information is on our website. Our three are Sakina, Hamsini, and Women in STEM. They are tailored for students to have an enriched experience shared around some interests. Again, I highly encourage your students to go on our website, learn more about these communities, and then again, if they're interested, to definitely apply. And for you parents, most importantly, are our cancellation policies. Students may cancel their housing contract through March the 31st with no penalty. So that means after, let's say your student goes through the room selection process, selects a room, and decides it's just not going to work for them, they have the opportunity to cancel their housing application with no penalty. After March the 31st, and if a cancellation is received and approved, there is a $500 cancellation fee. And then we go into the summer. Any cancellations received after June 15th will not be approved. The only approved cancellations we accept after the 15th are withdrawals, defers, or leave of absence. And then if a cancellation is approved, there is a $500 cancellation fee that also occurs. Just a couple of additional information. We do have fraternity housing. We call it chapter housing. Students who are offered a bid and accept from their fraternity should communicate with their chapter leadership about their housing capacity for the housing process. Each chapter runs their housing selection differently. So that's why we highly encourage them to talk with their chapter leadership if they're participating in fraternity housing. Any student still wanting to live in the fraternity housing still is required to complete a housing application in order to be eligible for chapter facility housing. All of our housing is gender inclusive, so we do not take gender into consideration when assigning housing, and students have the opportunity on their housing application to indicate if they want to be a part of gender inclusive housing or not. And again, majority of all of this information I shared is on our website. Again, I highly encourage everyone to read through the information. And if you have any questions, definitely email us at Residential Life, and we'll do our best to answer all of your questions. So thank you, Reggie.
Thank you, Will, for sharing all of that information. As you know, the class of 2024 has lived through some unique circumstances this year. Due to this, some family members are wondering if there will be residential life staff living in areas like the village apartments, and will they be working to create community amongst students? Would you be able to speak to this?
Yes, so we will have residential life staff in all of our facilities, from RAs to professional living staff to faculty and residents. Will definitely be available within the community supporting students.
Thanks, Will. We will now be moving on to the remainder of our question and answer portion of this webinar. As a reminder, please submit your questions via the Q&A feature. Will, the first question that we have is, what options for housing do rising sophomores and rising juniors, as well as seniors, have this upcoming year?
Rising sophomores will have the option to live on campus. We're going to try our best. We're still seeing what the numbers are going to look like, but our goal is to keep as many of the sophomore students living on main Danforth campus, and then ensuring that juniors and seniors have opportunities for housing in our off-campus property that's very close and nearby and all within shuttle routes to campus.
Great, thank you. What options for grouping? What are the options for grouping that rising sophomores and rising juniors will have this year?
So we are highly encouraging sophomore students to form groups of 4 because majority of our on-campus housing are in groups of 4. We have limited 3 and 2-person options on campus, and there's no 1 person. So if you're a sophomore, we encourage you to form groups of 4. We will release the exact numbers of what's available once we get closer to group selection. And then for juniors and seniors, we are highly encouraging students to form groups of 3. We have options of 3 and 2. More of those options, 2s and 1s in our off-campus apartment areas. But we encourage students to follow the guides that we're going to email out to them so that they're aware of what's available, but they're highly encouraged to form groups of 3 if possible.
If students have a housing group of a certain number, but find out that during the selection process that there are no apartments available for that number, how would you recommend they proceed? What other options are available to them?
So students, if they don't, any student that receives a time slot and a date, we've guaranteed when they log into our housing portal that there will be an option for them. Now, for students who do not receive a time slot due to us receiving a high demand for a specific area. So if a group of juniors, group of 2, are looking for a 2-person apartment, we've already told you we have very limited those. They will go to our administrative assignment process, and my assignments team will work hard to place those students later on in the process, trying our best to ensure that the group stays together.
Can students make any edits to their housing application following the deadline or after the deadline has passed?
Yes, to certain parts, they can go back, they can change their meal plan options, they can change their preferences, they can, anything they update their emergency contact information. So the application's open for students to make changes. It's just once we get into once they receive a time slot in a day, we do enable the application so there's no more changes so that we can ensure everything is set up for when students go through the selection process.
We have some family members asking, if a student decides after the deadline has passed that they wish to go through the housing process, will they be accommodated? How does that work?
So we will have a waitlist process where if a student does not complete an application by the March 1st deadline, they cannot participate in the grouping and the selecting of a room, but they will still have an opportunity to sign up for housing, and it will be based off availability. That's why we highly encourage everyone to submit an application, even if they're weighing multiple options of what their housing could look like. Again, the cancellation deadline is March 31st. We will have gone through the housing process to give students an opportunity to figure out what. And I'm so sorry, my dog is barking.
No, that's totally understandable. Well, the next couple of questions, oh, I'm going to give you a second to, to come back. Okay, the next couple of questions are in regards to fraternity housing. So how does housing work with recruitment and fraternity housing, since recruitment is an ongoing process? And the second question to follow up with that is, can you sign up for university housing and withdraw at a later date if accepted into a fraternity and then decide to stay in fraternity housing?
So like fraternity housing and res life housing is all the same. It's one housing application. When a student applies for housing, they're also the only way they can be eligible for fraternity housing if they go through the fraternity process. If they want to ensure that they have housing, we encourage all fraternity members to apply and then work with their chapter members to understand their chapter leadership to understand how their housing selection process will work. Only individuals with res life contracts are eligible to live in fraternity housing.
Great, thank you. Well, I know that you had mentioned a little bit about our living and learning communities. Are students able to form their own living and learning communities beyond the ones that you all had shared? And if this is not an option for the 2021-2022 academic year, will this be an option offered in the future?
So it will not be an option for the upcoming year. We are focusing on our 3 established living learning communities for the upcoming year, but we definitely will be working with students, specifically those rising sophomores and juniors, on looking at how we can expand our living learning communities in the future. But due to limitation and being at an 85% cap capacity due to health concerns, we decided to limit to the 3 established communities on campus.
We have a number of family members asking, what happens to a student who passes on the group section or the group part and applies by themselves?
So we receive many students that go through that process. What we will do is look at what that student's preferences were, and my assignments team will work really closely with those students to pair them up with students that share many of the same interests as them. Most of the time, we'll give the student multiple options so that to make sure that they're a good fit, but we definitely work really closely with students who are individuals looking for housing placements to make sure we pair them in a good fit.
Great, thank you. Will, can you talk about how the university decides which housing communities to use for quarantine and isolation housing? Specifically, it seems like Millbrook would make an ideal apartment living situation for sophomore students wanting to live together, but is instead being used as quarantine and isolation housing. Can you talk a little bit more about that selection?
So again, we worked with our health professionals to determine what were the best locations to be able to house students and for them to build relationships with others. And I think as you alluded, Millbrook is broken up from 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 8s, 9s. It's definitely a broad range. In our housing portfolio, we're ensuring that majority of students are living with no more than 4 students only. And that was following the guidelines of WashU health professionals to ensure proper social distancing. We've also limited the number of bathrooms that students are sharing amongst each other. And due to location of Millbrook, it was ideal and a great space to be able to support students who need quarantine and isolation, close to health services, dining services, and being on campus to support their needs. So that was basically the whole reason why Millbrook was selected. But we have plenty of 4-person options suited to ensure sophomores have an excellent experience living on campus.
Well, one issue when choosing a group, and we want to acknowledge that we're speaking to families of a wide range of folks, including rising juniors and rising seniors. One issue when choosing a group is determining if someone is committed to living in a similar situation, such as a substance-free living situation. Would residential life be able to provide a way for students to indicate preference for substance-free housing and enable such students to connect with one another? What does that look like?
So for all of our undergraduate spaces where individuals are under the age of 21, they are all substance-free communities. Because as students are selecting their own roommates this year and forming their own groups, we encourage those students to have those tough conversations with their peers. And if, because they're going to know their peers' behaviors better than us, and maybe than what someone would put on an application. And if they don't feel that their peers or their selected roommates are not following those laws, we would highly encourage that they don't form groups with those people and find groups with individuals who do want to share similar lifestyles and behavior choices so you can ensure that your students being successful in college.
We recognize that this year has been difficult in allowing folks to get to know one another. Can you speak more in detail about how students can connect virtually to meet potential roommates, specifically for those who studied remotely this year?
So as I said in my presentation, our Res Life team is creating some really cool virtual experiences. Again, COVID has limited our ability to bring students together, but we're coming up with some really clever social media tools that I'm not even the most clever with, but I'm telling you, your students are using them today. And they're going to be able to interact with students, meet with students through some chat ability. Even in our housing application, we have a feature where students can search students based off of how they filled out their questionnaire on the housing application. They can send messages back and forth. But again, all of that information is going to be presented to students very soon once the application comes to a close. Our hall staff, our RAs, all are going to be well-versed in how students can interact in all of those social media platforms to be able to interact and meet students that they potentially might want to live with.
Well, we have some folks who are asking some questions logistically. So can you speak to whether a student picks a specific room? Do they tell you, hey, I'm interested in living in room 112, or I'm interested in living in this building, or I'm interested in living in this kind of housing? Like, what does a student specify for you all?
So we do take students' preferences on the application, but again, we only do that for those, we collect all of that information up front in case the student's not able to pick their own space. Because they'll go into the portal and select their own room, majority of students, when I say majority, we receive over 2,500 applications. Typically 2,300 of the students will pick their own room and assign their own students. We usually have a pool of about 200 students that we manually have to assign. What's available is what's available. There will be options of traditional, options of modern. We've converted all of our traditional rooms into single rooms. So that's more single options available for students to select in this year's housing selection process. We've been approved to turn modern doubles back to modern doubles. And again, just ensuring the student will select for themselves and they will see what's available to them and be able to make the pick. If one building's full, they can go to another building and select. The system will only show them what's available at the time when they log in.
A second logistics question. Do all members of a group receive a time slot and then the group uses that first time slot? Or does the group as a whole receive one time slot? How does that work?
So the group as a whole will receive one time slot. And it's the group leader's responsibility to log in and select the room for the group at the time the group has been given. If the group leader is not able to make the time slot or date to select the room, then that group leader can assign the group leader responsibility to another member in the group. We highly encourage the groups to talk, to come up with a plan. If one plan is to go to this residential hall, but there's no more availability, what's their second choice? What's their third choice? What's their fourth choice, fifth choice, so forth, so that, because again, the group leader is the one making the selection. And again, I would say maybe be on Zoom. We don't want the students gathering, selecting. We want them to social distance and selecting the room, but know that the group leader is definitely the one logging in. And they can share each other's screens so that they could follow along. The use of technology today to be able to do this room selection process.
So earlier you had mentioned that it appears that the last day to select is March 30th. Is that enough time to select and or make the decision to cancel by March 31st's deadline?
It is. And what I say is we want to ensure that most students will receive a time and select probably by that last day. Again, we are looking at ensuring that students have the option. Many students will know going into selection what their options more likely will be. So if that wasn't the case, because again, we're going to release the number. So students, you'll be surprised, they're able to kind of calculate, okay, if my date is this time, this is more likely where my option will more likely be.
So it's important for our students to be thinking about this proactively as opposed to reactively with their groups.
That is correct.
Great. So we recognize that we're in some unprecedented times and that information changes. So should COVID guidelines change, what guarantees does the university have in terms of housing?
So again, we encourage you and your students to read our terms and conditions. COVID, though we did have to lower our capacity last year, throughout the whole time for students who had housing insecurities, students from international who could not receive flights, we still provided housing for many students who show the need of needing housing support. I hope we don't have to go down that path ever again, but we are committed to housing students and making sure they have a good experience. And in the case another pandemic or something was to happen that prevents us from doing that, our leadership will make the right call, but ensure all students who need it and don't have options will have housing available to them.
Family members, shortly we will be sharing the link for the terms and conditions. We encourage you to talk with your student about it, and it's a good practice for them later on. It was something that my family did with me, and I'd encourage you to have that conversation with them about the importance of reading through those pieces. Will, you'd mentioned a little bit about the room occupancies. So will all rooms be individual next year, or post-COVID, will some rooms have traditional roommates? Like, what does that look like?
So majority of our upperclassmen, which juniors and seniors, I would say all of them, if living in our off-campus apartments, will be living in a single bedroom, either sharing the bathroom with an additional roommate or a 1-to-1 ratio bathroom setup. On campus, which majority of our sophomores and freshmen will live, it will be majority of the freshmen living with a roommate because our health professionals have approved us to be at an 85% capacity. We did convert all the traditional rooms to singles due to ensuring there is a 4-to-1 bathroom ratio in many of our buildings that are set up that way. And then the moderns, we have a mixture of a couple of doubles where rising sophomores will have to share a room with a roommate, but majority of the housing available to them would be a single room occupancy.
Well, I recognize that this year, because of health guidelines, students have access to their own spaces for residential halls. Will students be allowed to go into other residential halls next year other than their own? And will campus be more open in the fall?
So we are still evaluating that. We will hopefully know more information come this summer and into the fall of what access we'll be able to allow students to have. Again, it's all based, I can't speak to where we are right now to where we will be in the future, but my fingers crossed, we hopefully should be able to, but again, that those decisions have not been made yet.
Family members, in the chat, we shared with you the Wash You Together website, which will outline the most up-to-date communications in terms of our university's decisions around COVID protocols. So we encourage you to save that link. Will, we're going to change gears a little bit. If you do not form a group, does that put you at a disadvantage for selecting where to live? Do you advise this option or strongly recommend finding someone to pair up with?
No, not at all. Again, we work really closely with the students who don't form the group. Sometimes we pair students up once we see who's in the pool. We take the students' preferences and where they want to live into consideration, where the student that forms a group, they only have what's available to them at the time. We wait to assign students later in the process who are individuals as we see where our MILT will be and where students will cancel a contract or decide they want to do something else or decide they want to go abroad or take time away. So we wait to see all the open availabilities, and then we don't move students once they make room selections. We take the students who are unassigned and then start pairing them up where we see they would be a good fit, and also meeting what their preferences were.
Great.
And then if there's a group that just doesn't get a time slot and need to be placed, we work really closely, and sometimes we do make some moves to keep people together in our process. So we do try our best to take care of all the students in this time because we understand it's very stressful.
Well, we have some family members asking, we have a lot of residence halls here at WashU. Is there an easy way to tell whether a residence hall is for a first-year student or for a sophomore, junior, senior student?
So we will be releasing that information soon. We're waiting to see what our exact numbers are. So again, if your student hasn't applied for housing, they should do it before March the 1st. And then after that March 1st date, me and my team will review the number and decide based off of the number of applications we receive, which buildings we're going to ensure that we make available. On the South 40, on the north side and off campus, we already know those are going to be for upperclassmen, but definitely looking at the South 40 and how we can ensure we have an even distribution of beds available for freshmen and sophomores.
Got it. Thank you. Well, for folks who are going to be seniors next year who do intend to live in residential life housing, what is the protocol should one suite mate graduate in December or graduate early? Would residential life assign a new student randomly for the spring semester? Is that space filled? Anything that you can share about that would be helpful.
So we do offer a room change process, which yes, my answer is we will assign someone to an open space if we need to. But for the most part, the seniors, juniors, they have friends who are coming back, students who are switching rooms, and we give them a room switch period. And that's typically before students leave for holiday break or winter break, and they switch rooms and they fill the suites based off of someone they may know. Now, there are some cases where students are very open to us assigning a new student, and students are sent email notifications letting them know that their space is open and that we potentially will be assigning someone to that space.
Well, if students are in a group of two, can they have Would they have two other folks administratively added to their group, or is that done later? How does that work?
So if you're a group of two, and my example would be a group of two, and let's say they form a group of two, but they want to go to a 4-person suite. They will not have the option to pick a room. The only thing in our system that will give them an option is for a 2-person if it's available. If the 2-person is not available, they'll be administratively assigned. And most likely, 99.9% of the time, we administratively assign them together to the same suite
Okay.
or apartment.
Right. Okay, thank you. For students who do not wish to live in residential life housing, but still want to live near the university, what support can the university offer for them?
Yes, so we, WashU has many available support. We have an assistant director for off-campus student life support that help navigate students through the leasing and process. We also have it's quadrangle and parallel properties that are WashU affiliated, but not part of residential life that students can also sign up for. But we, of course, want to encourage students to live with a residential life, especially those who are undergraduate students. But we definitely do have resources available to support students through that process. One benefit of, again, working with us is when students have conflicts, roommate situations, support, again, all the resources that we provide are RAs, hall staff, housekeeping services, all the things that some students may take for granted when they are out and they're like, oh, who's going to clean my bathroom? Well, we provide all of that, those types of services here in residential life.
Well, we have time to ask one last question for the evening. As a reminder, family members, any questions that were not able to be answered during the webinar will be addressed via email directly to the person who posed the question next week. Panelists, Will, thank you so much for the information that you shared tonight. We have one last question. What last advice do you have for families as they help their students navigate the housing selection process this year?
So my first is ensure, double check with your student that they applied for housing by March the 1st. Review our website because many of your answers are all answered in our FAQ area. And then I would really encourage if your student is feeling nervous about the whole process or the ability that COVID has hindered their ability to meet all the people that they would have thought they would have traditionally met. Sign up for some of our virtual experiences. They're going to be cool. They're going to mix groups up where you go from one room to the other and allow students to interact. So definitely support the student, encourage them to participate in the activities, ask their RA questions, their RCD questions if they have any questions about our process, and know that it's a new year. And that's part of our theme this year. It's a new year. We're going to have more students living with us. So again, we only had 50% of our occupancy filled for this upcoming year. We're moving to 85. So it's baby steps. We're allowing individuals to have roommates. So that's going to really encourage more interaction with students.
Well, thank you so much again. Family members, we hope that today was really helpful and that you were able to learn some valuable information this evening. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and will be shared at the families.woostall.edu website next week. Families, stay tuned for our next webinar, a conversation with mental health services on March 1st. You'll be able to register for this webinar at families.woostall.edu. We'll see you then. Thank you for joining us.